Hey guys, it's Belle, and in this video I am very excited to talk to you about this poem, which is the Epitaph of King Wamba, which was written by the monk and historian Julian of Toledo. And yeah, this is just the tombstone of a Visigothic king. So first I will read through the Latin and then we will go through them line by line. So forgive me as usual if my Latin diction is off. Wamba prius qui Petrus eras miseque minister, rex Gothice gentis religione micas, sponde tua non affectas regale cacumen, sed subis imperi grande coactus onus. Spes tua conatusque tus virtute potentis, fretus inauditas res operatus ades, nulla perdende tali res gratiordusque puete est. Cenobiumque gaudens post sacra sceptra petis. Septemibi perpetuos monachus bene preteris annos, oblata inde pollos morte beatus adis. Felix Wamba tua censeris sorte fuisse, tam bene qui calcat sceptra per astra valet. Septem sceptra due gentis moderaris in annos, que sinnis aud morbi molle sed ipse libens. So, what does all of this mean? Wamba prius qui Petrus eras, which is really interesting. O King Wamba, O King Wamba, qui Petrus eras, you who used to be Peter, miseque minister, and a minister of the Mass, rex Gothice gentis, so king of the Gothic people. Now that's actually quite interesting that Julian of Toledo is giving Wamba this as a title. I believe that Julian of Toledo is writing in the 700s. So King Wamba is like being portrayed here as a king specifically of the Gothic people. There's no mention of the Spanish people, also the Roman people. There's none of that. He's just known as the king of the Gothic people, which is quite interesting. And slash or there is another interpretation of this, because we can read this adjective Gothice gentis of the Gothic people as going with rex, so being king of the Gothic people, or it could be O king Mikas, which means you twinkle, you glitter, religione, in the religion of the Gothic people, which is less likely as an interpretation because that would plausibly refer to Arian Christianity, which by this time was long eradicated from Visigothic Spain. So it's more likely that he's just king of the Gothic people, but bear in mind that that's a possible interpretation of it. Sponte tua non affectat regale cacumen. So, you do not desire regale cacumen, the royal peak, sponte tua, of your own volition, sed subis imperri grande coactus onus, but you undergo subis grande onus, this immense burden, coactus, having been coerced, and then imperri is of the empire, so you undertake this great burden of the empire, having been forced to. Now this is quite interesting because it is a really common trope in monastic literature in the life of a monk for the monk to be offered a promotion, for the other brethren in his community to want to make this monk an abbot, and the monk always turns it down. He's like, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do this, and then eventually he gives in and says, okay, fine, I'll become abbot. And this serves many functions in monastic literature. Part of it is a humility trope. In medieval, particularly monastic Latin literature, one is expected to perform a degree of humility. And actually, what's really sweet and charming is if you go to the YouTube channel Latin Talk, these are videos uploaded by the unfortunately now deceased Reginald Foster, who was a monk who used to be the head Latinist for the Vatican, and he had a really illustrious career, and he wrote some amazing books. He created the course that taught me Latin, so an amazing guy. And you can hear him talking in these videos in Latin, and I don't know if he's released, I think some of those videos have English subtitles, so you can go and watch them if you like. But he, in those videos, speaks with this same kind of humility and this self-effacing style of rhetoric that you see in the monastic literature, where it's like, I'm so unworthy, I couldn't possibly take this job, but if you insist, I will. So that's sort of what Julian of Toledo is implying for King Wamba here. He's like, you didn't even want to become king, oh great King Wamba, because you're so pious. You used to be a minister of the church, and you apparently had a different name. So Peter might have been his Latin name that he used in the church. But it's interesting that he says, you who were Peter. Now, there's a couple of different meanings that this could take, but Erdas is past tense, so it's sort of, well, there's a couple, because if he's dead now, right? This could mean that you used to be Peter while you were alive, or it could be, you're called Wamba now. You used to be called Peter in an earlier time. So I think it's probably the former meaning, that he also used to be called Peter, because this is an epitaph, so it's being written at the time when Wamba is now dead. But nonetheless, it's quite interesting. And this seems to be when he's connected to the Mass. So you were Peter, misseque minister, as a minister of the Mass. So it seems to be that King Wamba, when he entered monastic life and entered into monastic service, took on a Latin and went by a Latin rather than a Gothic name. So this really interesting switch of ethnicity that we have going on here. When he's in the role of serving the church, he goes by the name Peter, and when he is the Rex Gothici Gentes, when he's the king of the Gothic people, then he is Wamba, Rex Wamba. So that's quite interesting, I think. So yes, you undertake the heavy burden of the empire having been forced to spes tua conatus quetus virtute potentis, fretus inauditas res operatus ades. So, what does all of this mean? Spes tua, your hope, conatus quetus, your I'm going to say this is your effort, basically, your attempt, virtute potentes, in the virtue of power or in the masculinity of power. Fretus, the channel, inauditas res, the unheard things, operatus ades, or rather perhaps you are present, having worked, ades, operatus, you have worked, operated, fretus and inauditas res, you have achieved, you've created channels, waterways, and you have created unheard things. I'll be honest, I don't fully understand what inauditas res is meant to refer to here. Nulla perdende tali res gratior usque quiete est. So, nulla res gratior. No thing is more welcome, perdende, which means in the same manner, tali quiete, than such rest, than such quiet, than such rest. Cenobiumque gaudens post sacras sceptra pedis. So, gaudens is he's rejoicing, cenobiumque pedis, and you, being rejoicing, you seek the cenobium, you seek the monastic enclosure, post sacra sceptra, after the sacred scepters. And that's quite interesting as well. The idea of describing the scepters of Visigothic rule, the symbols of Visigothic kingship, as sacred. This shows us to begin with that the Visigoths had scepters that were symbols of their power, which is not too surprising. It's a relatively common trope across early medieval Europe, having been inherited from the Romans. However, it's quite interesting that they are described as sacred as opposed to merely terrestrial symbols of power, which means that perhaps we're seeing the beginnings of a Visigothic doctrine of divine kingship developing in this poem. Perhaps it's a bit hard to say. But what this line is saying is that there was nothing better than such rest that you get in the monastery. So when you were able to put down the royal scepters and take up monastic life, you were very happy. Septem ibi perpetuos monachos bene praeteres annos. So, monachos, as a monk, preteris, you passed septem an perpetuos annos septem. You passed 7 years altogether as a monk in that place very well. Oblata inde polos morde beatus adis. Beatus is as a blessed man. Adis, you are present. Or you sort of go to, basically, the polos, you go to the poles. So you, as a blessed man, you're going towards the celestial poles, the poles of heaven. Oblata morte, with death having been taken away. So notice, this is not Wamba having been taken away by death. This is with death itself, oblata having been taken away. So death is removed from Wamba, and he's going to be seeking the poles of heaven. Felix, Wamba tua censelis sorte puisse. Wamba, you are judged to have been happy. Censelis fuisse, you are judged to have been happy. Tua sorte, by your own account or by your own fortune. Tam bene qui calcat sceptra per astra volet. So this is an interesting line. He who tramples sceptra, calcat sceptra, tam bene, so well, per astra volet, he will fly through the stars, which is quite dramatic imagery as well, but it's saying that anybody who despises the trappings of monastic rule to the extent that you do will fly through the stars. And King Wamba seems always to have had a very special connection to monasticism and monastic living. We see here that he sort of gave up his rule 7 years before his death to live in a monastery, and we also see in one of the Epistolae Visigothicae, which, bear in mind, are not attested in any manuscript form. They are only known from antiquarian transcriptions from manuscripts which have since been lost, but we do have a poem, allegedly by King Wamba, where he is celebrating giving his son Theodula in a sort of relationship to the monastic man named Sundrimer. So there definitely seems to be a strong connection of Wamba with monastic living. He even sent his son off to be a monk. Septem sceptra tue gentes moderavis in annos. You sort of, you tempered, or you are tempered, or you tempered septem sceptra, the 7 scepters, tue gentes, of your people, in annos, for 7 years. So it's saying that he ruled for 7 years and then he lived as a monk for 7 years. But it's so interestingly describes it as the scepter of your people. So the scepter here is clearly a stand-in for royal rule and royal power. So he was the king of the Gothic people, and when he gives up the scepter, he's trampling the scepters of his people. So one can read this perhaps as an interesting almost rejection of ethnic alliance as well, because in refusing the scepters of the Gothic people in order to give up his role as a king, King Wamba, or now monk Peter, is removing that ethnic aspect of his identity and subsuming that into the literally universal Catholic Church, because the word Catholic, of course, means universal or for everybody. And therefore, Peter is rejecting Gothicness and entering into a more universal identity, which is so interesting. Que sinis aud morbi molle sed ipse libens. So, those things which you permit, que sinis aud morbi molle, barely under a mass, under the weight of illness. So basically saying you chose to do this not because you were sick and you weren't able to carry on the kingship, so therefore you retired to a monastery, said ipse libens, but because you yourself were willing. And I think that's quite a cool little story we've got there. I hope you guys enjoyed this little examination of this poem by Julian of Toledo on King Wamba's epitaph. If you want me to teach you Latin or any of the other languages I do on this channel, You can subscribe to my Patreon, which will be linked in the description of this video, and you can also join my Discord server, where I tend to post these videos as tidbits before they go live. So thank you guys so much for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe, and I hope you have a nice day. Bye, everyone.